So I'll go first if you like. Hi, I'm Nikitas Koussis. I am I guess, adult fantasy author. I dabble mostly in new adult crossover, um, speculative fiction, predominantly fantasy. My book, my first book, is coming out on the 16th of September, um, very soon, actually. It's called The Sword of Mercy and Wrath, and I have the cover up back there. It's available for pre-order now. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I've completely forgotten the acknowledgement of country. So I am on Awabakal land. I acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land and rivers that we work and live on, that I work and live on, and acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging.
My name is Julia. I'm on Wurundjeri land in Naarm, so called Melbourne. Um, and my writing is predominantly non-fiction. Um, it's very hopeful, I would say, and I think that's where it like delves into the speculative realm. Um, but I'm not a speculative fiction writer at this stage, so I really appreciate the genre. Grace?
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear more about speculative elements in your nonfiction writing and especially hopeful futures. I think that's a really exciting and interesting direction in spec fic, and I'm really personally keen to read more in that area. So hi, before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded sovereign lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my deepest respects to their elders, past and present, and to any First Nations people in the audience today. I also want to acknowledge that Indigenous storytellers as the earliest speculative fiction storytellers on this land. So I am a huge fan of speculative fiction, have been since I was a kid. I have a bunch of short stories published in mostly sci-fi and fantasy magazines. And I really enjoy writing across a range of lengths, so playing with things from short stories to novelettes and novellas. And yeah, recently my debut novel came out with Affirm Press just a month ago. It's called Every Version of You, and it is a science fiction novel that uses virtual reality and mind uploading to explore identity, change, and the future of humanity, I guess. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome. Congratulations, by the way.
So, oh, thank you. And to you too. Next month is your debut.
16th, next week.
Oh, 16th this
Wow.
month.
Yeah.
Okay. Clearly my sense of time is completely warped.
Oh, I understand totally.
And you mentioned yours is an adult fantasy novel, is that right?
Yeah, with crossover elements to young adult. I would say predominantly adult because it does touch on some sensitive topics. I would say not. I guess So anyway, something that's a bit more adult for a 16-year-old, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a question to both of you about your fiction work? I'm really curious to know when you're writing, like either when you started writing your respective novels or like when you write short stories or novellas or like whatever it may be. I'm curious to know whether um, you have like a specific audience in mind, not necessarily by age group, but just like, is there someone that you're hoping to speak to with the speculative fiction that you're writing? Is there like key demographics that you're hoping will read it and like think deeply about whatever it is that you're writing about, or is it kind of like you you just want people to read it and like and digest it and think about it.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, my work is, yeah, I guess like when I write it, I write for someone like me, or you know, someone who's, I guess, someone who, like, I'm a Gamilaroi man, so I write for, you know, maybe because I identify with marginalized people quite a bit. I also have ADHD as well. That I write something outside of the realm of traditional fantasy, and for someone like me to enjoy and to feel like they're being included, as well.
I think that's a really interesting question, and I would say that I am really bad at thinking about the audience that I'm writing for. So I would say that I don't often think about things like what demographic am I writing for, or what's my target audience, or even what genre I'm writing in. So when it comes to that process of thinking, is this something written for a young adult audience or an adult audience, or is it speculative fiction or not? That's when I have to go, I'm really not sure. And it just kind of is something that's slapped on later. I think that's because when I write, I feel like the main reasons that I'm writing are to figure out aspects of my own identity. And I guess that's reflected in, similar to you, Nikitas, like often I have characters who are perhaps more observers or on the fringes of society, or trying to figure out what their role is in the world, or how to respond to things that are rapidly changing or quite catastrophic in the world around them, or just feeling quite adrift or shape-shifting in some way or form. And yeah, linked to that, I guess, why I write is because I'm trying to figure out like what I feel and think about stuff happening around me. And it can be a way to go, if the world keeps going in this direction, this is what I think it's going to look like in, 100 years from now, or 200 years from now, or even 50 years from now. So you can present those kinds of feelings and thoughts through speculative fiction in a really powerful way, I think. And the flip side of that is turning it around and presenting alternate futures, I think, which is a really exciting aspect of speculative fiction, like using, what about technology for good? What if we have a society where capitalism and consumerism are resisted and reduced, and we actually reduce class and gender inequality and climate change and use tech for good and all that? But I'm rambling, so I'm going to stop and pass it back to someone else.
No, that's great. Thank you both for sharing. The reason I ask is just because I feel like my introduction to speculative fiction was Octavia Butler, and then more recently reading Claire G. Coleman, and like both of them, I feel like are writing about very specific, or like drawing from very specific experiences and very specific like periods of history, and with Octavia Butler being a Black woman and Claire being an Aboriginal woman, they're both talking about like they're both using this speculative fiction to commentate on those aspects of their identity. So I guess like specifically because this program was programmed to be with people of color, I was curious to know how much those experiences come into your speculative fiction work, and yeah, whether you feel like you're writing more for people like you or for people not like you, like whether it's kind of trying to appeal to people who maybe don't have this insight into certain experiences, or whether it's more about like solidarity and like showing people who do have the same experiences as you that like you understand and that they have something similar to their experiences reflected in literature, if that makes sense. And it sounds like you both have like similar but also kind of different approaches to that, which is really interesting.
Yeah. Minor spoilers for my book, but it's sort of like I wanted to discuss how, or at least pose how Indigenous people and their identities in colonized places can be completely twisted and like can be, I get this. This isn't a word. I think monsterized, like turned into something like going back to I think it was the UN people that were labeled as cannibals, and um, maybe some people. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I forget the name. But it's a people up in far north Queensland. They were basically libeled by the settlers, by the colonizers, and killed for that reason. Like to make themselves feel better, the white man has libeled and labeled Indigenous people all over, like and you know African people in the colonies there as well, and just say like they're the cannibals, they're you know monsters, savages, and for me, my work is about I guess tackling that and rediscovering the truth, I guess, about the Indigenous people of the land that the characters live on, and how that can, I guess, be healing as well. That process can be healing.
That's really interesting as well because I guess what I mean is like that appeals to me because my family are Māori and a similar kind of misconception around like cannibalism and savagery and these kind of very westernized ideas of what societies are meant to be like, and so they impose like this kind of monster
Yeah.
villain type thing onto people.
I think that's it can be an interesting experience to feel like, I mean, not an uncommon experience for people from marginalized communities to be othered and monsterized by the dominant mainstream culture. And I was thinking about how, like, in horror, the monster is often like presented as other and foreign. And I get excited nowadays because I feel like in horror, there's a fair bit of horror coming out from marginalized writers, and that there's a sort of reclaiming of the otherness and the monstrousness that sort of flips that on its head and can be quite empowering to kind of turn that back to front. So yeah, I was lucky enough to be part of an anthology that came out in late 2020 called Black Cranes: Tales of Unquiet Women, and it was put together by Lee Murray and Genevieve Flynn, and it was a collection basically of various stories of horror, spirits, ghosts, monsters by Asian women from various countries around the world. And yeah, I think it was a really cool bunch of stories in the end. Yeah.
Very cool.
It sounds really cool.
Yeah. What I guess maybe Grace, you could. I mean, I'm not really familiar with the, I guess the, I don't know what to call it, like the Asian experience of imperialism and you know Western society, because I don't have that experience myself, and I wondered sort of if there's some similarities between, I guess, you know, marginalized people of all stripes. I don't know if there. Maybe I'm rambling here and just there's no comparison at all. But yeah, I wondered if there was some similarity, if you heard any similarities with Julia's experience as a Maori woman and like my experience as a Vanillaway man. Because I'm curious. I'm really, really curious.
I don't know. I think that's a really big question that I don't have the answer to, but I can only speak from my own personal experience, which is, so I'm Malaysian Chinese in terms of ethnicity, and I was born in Malaysia, and my family is ethnically Chinese. And we migrated here when I was pretty much an infant, a toddler, and grew up in a very white suburban area. So my parents' experiences of a colonized Malaysia with a very sort of British imposed education and all that, and some periods of unrest during their childhoods, and a long history of kind of migrating and moving around throughout our family history. My personal experience is that I don't know much about that history because we sort of came to a new place and started afresh. And I think often for migrants, there's this feeling of wanting to leave the old behind. So for children of migrants, there's a feeling of maybe feeling a bit adrift and feeling like you are a bit of an other or a bit of a monster in a way in this new society. People see you as very strange and foreign, and you've got to try and figure out how to shape yourself to fit in and be acceptable in this new world. So I don't know if I feel like each certainly my experience is not going to be the same as each of yours, and there's a lot of individual subjectivity and difference across those experiences, I think. But I do find that people who have migration in some way or form in their past, I do find that there's a lot of like personal connection with when I speak with them. Yeah.
Sorry to hit you with such a huge question. I didn't really plan
That's
that.
okay. I'm happy to share.
Thank you for sharing as well. I really appreciate that. I wondered if you might, I guess, consciously or unconsciously bring that experience to your writing.
Yeah, I'm really keen to hear your thoughts as well, and I'm mindful that I don't want to talk for too long, but I think I do without realizing it. Like you touched a bit, Nikitas and Julia, on like your question earlier, Julia, was like about just solidarity and representation in why we write speculative fiction, and I think that's a big thing. Like you kind of write it for yourself, and you write it for people, and you kind of write the stories that you wanted to see when you were a kid growing up as well. Like you just wanted to see stories with people who you could identify with and like have them doing cool things and have, be able to read lots of different types of stories that you could identify more with. So I think representation is not something that I'm like intentionally trying to insert into my writing, but it just happens because, if I write a novel, it's going to be, populated with the kind of people that, I see around me and in my world. So yeah, there's going to be mostly people of, color, people of different backgrounds, queer people that, that's the kind of world that I see and I want to see in my writing. And I guess personally, that feeling of like, I guess I like speculative fiction and I'm drawn mostly to science. I write mostly science fiction. And I love exploring characters who perhaps I find that I write a fair few characters who are like cyborgs in some way or semi-human in some way, or, they're not quite normal in some way. And they're trying to navigate or observe society or resist society in some quiet way. So I think that kind of reflects a little bit of my own like personal, like what draws me towards, or that personal relationship to speculative fiction. But yeah, I'm really curious to hear if you're willing to share, each of you, like how you feel your personal identity translates into the creative work that you do.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, mostly what I write is nonfiction, specifically personal essay and memoir and cultural criticism and stuff kind of like that. And so um, when I first started thinking about like publishing my writing and submitting it to online publications and like trying to develop a voice for myself in the Australian literary scene, I like the main thing that I wanted to talk about were my experiences being disabled and my experiences being chronically ill, and I guess more specifically the like alienation and the isolation I felt as a disabled child, and how like and just the ways in which it kind of shaped me, and shaped the way that I see the world and the things that I want from the world and like the way that I interact with other people. And it's only recently that I've started trying to write about other things because I I felt like I had so many unspoken thoughts or like thoughts that were only kind of half baked, that I didn't get a chance to talk to anyone about for a really long time. And then suddenly there was this platform with which other people were reading my work and interacting with it and speaking to me about it and responding to it. And so that was really cool. And that made me want to just keep getting a lot of these thoughts and feelings out. And then it kind of just started overwhelming me a little bit when it felt like that was the only thing that I could write about or that I like felt comfortable writing about. And so I'm actually trying to write more about things that aren't as like related to my identity, just because it feels like when I'm writing mostly about stuff that I've experienced, it feels like I'm putting just so much of myself into the writing, and I feel quite vulnerable, and then that puts me off wanting to write sometimes. And so now I'm trying to keep up my writing practice, and not get like too scared to write anything or put anything out there. So I've kind of just like put that put those themes on hold for a little bit, and I'm writing more about stuff that isn't like it's always going to be a little bit related to my identity because I'm the one writing it, but that's a bit more just kind of relaxed and a bit more like open and um, experimenting with other forms and stuff like that. Um, I think that answered your question. I got to a point where I kind of forgot what you asked, but yeah, I suppose the gist is that like yes, I do write about my identity in the specific way in my nonfiction work, but I'm trying to strike a better balance between it, just so I'm not only writing about my identity and only writing about my experiences.
Sorry, you go.
No. I was just really quickly going to say, yes, I was mindful when I asked that question that it is a bit of a loaded question as well, because I didn't want you to feel like you're always kind of, as you put it so well, it can feel really vulnerable to feel constantly pressured to draw on your identity in your creative work, and it can be quite draining. So, I think that was... also, sometimes you just want to write something for the joy of it, and not have to think about I think that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, sorry, you go, Nikita.
No, I related to that. I sort of had a question, or I guess a statement, whether you guys identify with this or not. But like I myself am independently published. And maybe this is directed to Grace because you're traditionally published, but do you, and Julia, because you've got work published in magazines and that sort of thing, do you feel like the traditional publishing scene, especially in Australia, is very directed towards a certain kind of marginalized person? Like it's very I guess you're not allowed to talk about certain things, or when you talk about your identity, you sort of have to be, oh, I need to be also commercialize this. I need to commercialize my identity. I need to fit in this box. And I can't talk about my experience. Like, you can be disabled, you can be, black or indigenous or whatever, but you're not allowed to sort of meld those experiences and be unique and yourself. And I guess, yeah, it comes with existing in a capitalist system that we need to make our work commercial and that sort of thing. Like, I myself have made concessions to make my work a bit more, I guess, reach a broader audience. But I guess I wanted to hand it to you guys, and whether you wanted to sort of remark on that, or
Do you want to go
Grace,
first,
do you wanna-
Julia?
Do you have something you wanted to say? You feel free to.
Oh, no, I was going to say if you wanted to go first. I'm still gathering my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything. Like, I'm in the process of writing a personal essay collection, and I haven't even begun thinking about publishing. In the sense of like publishing a book. As I said, I've got some stuff published on like Overland and like Archer magazine, and I I don't know. I'm interested to hear more about what you have to say about this, because I'm curious to know where this question, like what has led you to want to talk about this. And while you were asking it, I had a thought, and I don't know if it really answers what you've asked, but it reminded me of, I've recently started reading like three books in a row by the same author, and I won't say who it is, but she's an American white queer cis woman who like her writing is very open and honest, and it's like a bit crass at times, and it's like that kind of genre of like a bit self-deprecating. And when I was reading it, I was like, this is unlike anything that I've read in a really long time, because I've intentionally been trying to read books by like predominantly people of color, and predominantly trans authors, and people who up until like not that long ago didn't have that much work available, or like did, but it wasn't as easily accessible as perhaps it is now. And when I was reading this book, I was like, I can't tell if this person is like really brave, because they're writing in this specific way that is just so, it's like they have no shame. They're not embarrassed whatsoever about what they're saying. They're just like putting everything that they have into this writing. And it made me wonder whether it's like, by being a writer who's a person of color, a writer who is queer, who is trans, who is disabled, you internally have this like self-consciousness that makes it really difficult to market yourselves as this same kind of person that like cis, white, able-bodied women can market themselves as so easily, which is like, no holds barred. I say what I want, and I'm problematic sometimes, and like it's fine, because that's just my quirky personality. I feel like it's much harder for like other marginalized groups to have the same kind of like nuance, or like allow themselves the same kind of like nuance and complexity and like layers, which doesn't mean that they don't have them. It just means that, I feel like publishing houses maybe, or like publishers or agents or what are they called? The marketing people, really try and like box a lot of these people into very specific kind of neatly packaged people, where it's like, very like coloring between the lines and trying not to rock the boat too much or something like that. I don't know if that makes much sense. It's just what came to mind when you were talking about this, like the double standards, I suppose, in expectations maybe.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have that experience myself, because Well, I guess I kind of do, because I've as I said, I've limited myself to the kind of like my work. The series that I'm currently writing takes place in an alternate medieval Germany. So it's kind of like everyone's mostly white. I have tried to, because medieval societies were very diverse, like surprisingly diverse, because they had trade with Arabic people, with you know Chinese people coming from the Silk Road and that sort of thing, and just having that reflected in my work as well. But yeah, definitely predominantly because I wanted to, I guess, make it a bit more commercial. That not that I see it as a mistake, but just that I understand. I feel like I'm saying I'm a lot. Sorry. Uh, so anyway, I don't know where I was going with that. This is like, yeah, like I feel like I have limited myself, and maybe in the future I'll be a bit more confident. Because yeah, like I only found out that I was gonna, like, 5 years ago, so it's been a learning experience. And like, because my I think it was my uncle traced our ancestry, and went back, and I realized I was. But yeah, it's been a big learning experience, and only recently I've really embraced that identity as well. Um, yeah, just that sort of thing. Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling. So, Grace, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, like Julia, I was curious to know maybe what your experience was behind that question, and maybe why you decided to go with when you say independent publishing. Do you mean self-publishing your novels?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, okay. Yeah, curious to hear about that. I guess my own personal experience, like I feel like I don't have that much personal experience to speak from yet. I mean, I've got short stories and novellas out in a few Australian and international speculative fiction magazines and publications. And then the novel is published by an Australian publisher, Affirm Press. So I feel like in the few years that I've been writing more steadily, there's been kind of two quite divided worlds that I'm writing in. So there's been the international speculative fiction community, which is really, really active, but also really big, and very exciting. I think there's a lot of like smaller magazines that are doing really exciting things, highlighting a lot of new, emerging, diverse voices. Um, you know, magazines like, Strange Horizons and Fire and a bunch of those, Clark's World. And it was partly what gave me the push to go, hey, actually, maybe I can write speculative fiction and get it out there, because I saw people who were like me writing really awesome stuff. And I was like, this is the coolest. I want to do it too. So yeah, I think that's a really exciting space to kind of be reading and writing in. More locally, I don't feel like there's as much excitement about speculative fiction, maybe. I'm not sure. I and thinking about my first novel, had no idea what to expect. But Affirm Press have been a very awesome publisher to work with. Like it's been a wonderful experience. And I guess thinking about what you said, Julia, that feeling of maybe not being given the same sense of nuance within your identity when you are not a white cis het writer, it's like, you know, at the start I'm just a person writing a piece of work. I'm just a person writing a story. But then when it comes time to market and publish and market and promote the story, you become, you know, an Asian woman writing this, you know, story about people of color or whatever it is. So it gets put into a box inevitably, given the the sort of world that we're in at the moment. Yeah. So that's my experience, I guess.
I wanted to apologize before in this vein, like I said, you know, can you speak from the Asian experience? And of course you can't, because you're Malaysian Chinese, and you can speak from that perspective. I didn't mean to imply that you could speak for all Asians. So yeah, I wanted to apologize for that. But I guess, yeah, like anyway, so that was my I guess my question. And yeah, going further to that you are put in this box of an Asian writer by the community at large, or by publishing at large. And for me, I guess my experience with like, I have queried my work before with publishers and with agents, and I didn't see any success. And I did it for a while, and then I sort of realized, you know, as it is at the moment, publishing is very, very white, and I don't see people of my, like, I don't know any Indigenous publishers at all. I may be mistaken; they could be out there, but I yeah, I haven't heard of any, and it's a real shame. And I just don't see myself reflected in publishing, in the publishing houses, because it is very cis, white, het, you know, that sort of thing. So, and that was definitely my experience. And you know, maybe it is the quality of my work, and maybe I'm just a crap writer, but it could also be that, you know, because I'm writing my experience, the reader that is reading my work at the publishing house, or the agent, is not identifying with my work. And that's a big thing. Like, reading art, like all art, writing is subjective. And you relate your experience to the work you're reading. And maybe subconsciously, consciously, I'm not going to speak for publishers, but maybe that is reflected in their selections. And of course, you know, we can't see change until we see change in the structure. And, you know, that's just the way it goes, I think, at the moment. Yeah, I'm hopeful about the future, and I really, really think that there's some great people doing some great work out there. Like you say, like Clark's World, and what was the other one you said? Fire.
Yeah, Fire and
Yeah.
Strange Horizons and a few others as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's great magazines out there. There's probably, I mean, a firm press is probably great as well. But yeah, I don't see it. Like, it's very hard to think that there's going to be a big change. There's going to, of course, like all change is incremental, but you know, I can't wait forever. I have a book to publish, and that's what I have a voice to get out there, and I think it's a voice worth having. And you know, so I said, why not do independent publishing, see how it goes. I'm where I'm at the moment.
I totally agree. I think that you know, when the systems and the structures are set up to a certain way, like people who can't, they're going to bring their like unconscious biases into the work that they select to be published and platformed, and you know, they're going to platform voices that sound similar to their own, unless there's a concerted effort to change the, you know, the publishing industry and the people who hold kind of, who control what gets published. I know, like, we're kind of 40 minutes into the session, and I was really keen to, I hope you don't mind me changing tack a little bit, because I was really keen to kind of talk about the some positive, like really exciting aspects of speculative fiction. Like, for me, one thing that really draws me towards speculative fiction is the joy and the wonder of writing speculative stuff. I think that personally, it's like very that creative freedom and that ability to play with ideas when writing, I think is something that always brings me back to reading and writing speculative fiction. And it can be an act of self-care and an act of like self-exploration in many ways. And I'm also keen to hear about like like hopeful elements in speculative fiction and positive futures and that kind of thing, which I think Julia touched briefly on earlier. So yeah, I don't know if that's a springboard for any thoughts for either of you to pick up on. Not really a question, sorry. It was more just here are some thoughts. I don't know if that's anything you can pick up on.
Yeah, I think writing the kind of non-fiction that I do, even when I'm talking about really serious and kind of dire circumstances and ways in which I've felt disappointed in society or the economy or the government or whatever, I try to always wrap things up with like with hope and with kind of opportunity for us to reflect on the way that things are at the moment, and the ways in which, like, the kind of actions that we could take to make things different and to make things a better and more just world for a lot of different people. A lot of the framework that I tend to write within, a lot of the time is the disability justice framework, which is a specific way of kind of understanding the disabled experience, I suppose, and like a specific movement for disabled people that prioritizes disabled people who are of other marginalized groups. And it's a more intersectional approach, and it's a more kind of anti-capitalistic approach. And a lot of what it outlines are kind of ways in which society could change or evolve to be more to further like collective healing and collective liberation and hope and those kinds of things. And so it's a really beautiful framework, and it's kind of like it came about because things are so unfair and because there is so much hurt and trauma within the disabled community. But ultimately it is a very hopeful framework, and is trying to look at the way that things are at the moment and propose alternatives. So yeah, as I said, it's like it's anti-capitalist in nature. It's abolitionist in nature. It's very much focused on like dissolving a lot of the systems that we rely on at the moment and the ones that tend to harm people, like police and prisons and institutions and things like this. So yeah, pretty much now whenever I'm writing about like things that I'm unhappy with and that I'm disappointed in for like my community or my communities, I try and bring it back to this idea of like it doesn't have to be this way, and there are things that we can do. There are literal frameworks that people have developed to make world a different and better place, and bringing it back to like one of the first steps is just like building community and building solidarity with the people around you, and caring and loving for the people around you, and these kind of like seemingly like simple concepts like care for other people, but including it as like a response to something that is really unfair or unjust or what have you feels really important. yeah, so I guess that's the way in which I kind of do what you were saying, Grace, in my like non-fiction work. But I'm curious how you two apply these kinds of things in your speculative fiction work.
I've actually forgotten the question. Sorry.
It was about hopeful or positive elements
Yeah.
of speculative fiction, whether that's like just the joy of writing, like creative expression, creative freedom, imagining alternate futures, elements of hope in speculative fiction, that kind of thing. I really love what you said about the importance of, I think, compassion, Julia, in imagining different kinds of societies. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I guess it's great to see like that there are frameworks out there, and I do wish I'd read more theory and that sort of thing. Like I really want to get into bell hooks stuff, and just like really get some almost like I don't know, bring that to my own worlds that I write. And yeah, like it is for me in my stuff, in my work, it's transformative in the end that the monsterization of the indigenous people of the continent is that at the end it's given new purpose and new life. Like I guess a different it's a different perspective on things, and just having that aspect of that perspective is a transformative act in itself. And maybe we can see a more hopeful future by bringing a new perspective to things. And I'm not saying, of course, we need to abolish the police and abolish prisons and all of that. I'm not saying that we need just to look at things in a different way and everything will be fine. There are, of course, problems and systemic problems that need to be solved. But in a way, a lot of that can't happen until, well, at least I believe anyway, until we have that paradigm shift. And hopefully the next generations will have that. And I think our generation is having that sort of paradigm shift. And it's very amazing to see. And I guess understanding, the history of things and the path that we took to get here as a society, as humanity. And I guess in my work, because I write fantasy and I'm very interested in medieval fantasy, understanding that a lot of that, I guess, colonialism, imperialism started in that period, and bringing that forward to today, I guess, understanding how attitudes and perspectives can be malleable, I guess.
That sounds really complex and interesting to be writing about, Nikitas. Like it sounds like you're drawing on history and the forces that shaped, events throughout history, and then extrapolating into an alternate future where it sounds like things are turned around in some way, which sounds quite powerful. Sounds very cool.
It was perhaps accidental. I didn't intend to go into to write that series as that, but yeah, it just kind of ended up like that. I'm not sure, probably because of my own experiences as a marginalized person of color. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of my writing is not intentional. It's just like you write it and then you figure out what you're trying to say. Hopefully at some point, maybe after it's out there in the world. I mean, my own thinking about I guess I kind of shared a little bit, but yeah, I guess for me, one thing that draws me back towards speculative fiction is simply like the very simple joy and wonder that it can bring. So, writing and reading science fiction and fantasy in particular can be a source of joy and escapism for many people. And I think sometimes just the that in itself can be really powerful. That simple sort of imagining a more a happier or alternate future can be, escapist in a good way, and bring joy and wonder. And I think that's a very powerful thing that specfic can do. I guess personally, like in my own writing, sometimes I've written more dystopic or pessimistic kind of futures. So in my novel, I guess I extrapolated a bit from, imagining if nothing changes in terms of how we're addressing climate change, how the world is going to look like in 50 years is pretty pessimistic. And extrapolating from, how we're interacting with technology, what that could look like in 50 years. So my novel is a little bit maybe not totally dystopic, but not really a utopia either. But yeah, I guess in my future writing, I'm really excited to explore like alternate futures that are more utopic as well, like that present really maybe positive alternate futures. And I'm really excited about like subgenres like eco-punk and solar punk, and just the ideas of using technology to at a grassroots community level to build up community and to use technology for good. And yeah, I think that's something that I am intentionally hoping to read more in that space over the next few months. I don't know if you guys have heard of just as you were talking, I was also thinking about there's a bunch of speculative fiction collections that are like disabled people destroy speculative fiction, science fiction, and queers destroy science fiction, and women destroy science fiction. And it's like they're really awesome collections because they're just turning like really owning speculative fiction, and their collections of short stories. Anyway, just spruiking them for anyone who hasn't read them. Check them out because they're a bunch of very cool collections.
We probably don't have a lot of time, but I wondered if you guys have heard of Becky Chambers and other writers like her who have brought about this whole new subgenre of science fiction where they just write, or fantasy as well, where they just write about almost like slice of life type things, and they have very comfortable, close, like almost in one room type stories, but they're very hopeful, and it's like interpersonal stuff, and nothing is too high stakes. But she's seen an explosion in popularity in the last year or so, where because of COVID, because of the pandemic, and because of the imperial core is now experiencing, I guess, affecting things. We're being exposed. Living in Australia, we live quite comfortably, but now we're being exposed to resource shortages. The pandemic. Yeah, anyway, not to get too negative about things, but like she has seen this explosion. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I got the pronouns right there, but they've seen a huge explosion in popularity because people want that comfort and that experience. And moving forward, it's really exciting to see people who are exploring that not a utopia, but almost like what if things were solved? What if climate change was fixed? What if we got off our asses and actually fixed climate change? And what if we fixed society? What would that look like? And I guess in a way they are utopias, but problems still exist in those books, and people have interpersonal drama, and that's where the tension comes from. And I just thought, I don't know. I guess I wanted to spruik her work as well, their work. Sorry, again, I'm not quite sure of their pronouns. What were your guys' thoughts about that?
I'll just quickly say that I recently read Becky Chambers' To Be Taught If Fortunate, a novella, and absolutely loved it. It's, like you said, that sort of more intimate, sensitive still a space opera, and it's still about exploring, exoplanets, and it's very, it's got the, really interesting nitty-gritty scientific outer space environments, but it's also very thoughtful and very intimate, and there's a consideration of the ethics of interacting with other species and exploring and leaving our mark on other worlds. What is the ethics of that? So yeah, I think I agree. I think that sort of writing is wonderful.
I don't think I've read it. I missed the name of the person you said, but when you were describing it, I was like, I don't think I've read this, whatever it was. But it sounds really cool. So yeah, that's all I have to say about it.
I think we just have like 1 or 2 minutes left. So did anyone have any other points that they wanted to bring up in the last few minutes?
No, not particularly.
Okay. I think we covered a lot today. Maybe we'll leave it at that. Awesome. So yeah, it was really lovely chatting with you both, and I feel like it was just like a cozy chat. So thank you for tuning in. Yeah. I'd also encourage everyone who's checked out this panel to check out all the other exciting digital events in the National Young Writers Festival program. I'm pretty sure Nikitas is on 3 other panels, and Julia, I think you're doing a couple more events as well.
I had to pull out of my other events, but so this is my only event in the end, and I'm really grateful that it was with the two of you and that it was such a lovely conversation.
We had you exclusive.
Yeah, one night only.
Thank you. Thank you both, and thanks everyone for tuning in.